Money can't buy love, but it sure can complicate it. When 20-year-old Emma Martinez stepped off the Greyhound bus in Cedar Falls, Texas, she had exactly $47 in her pocket and a heart full of dreams about making it on her own. What she didn't expect was to collide with the most dangerous kind of man, one who could give her everything she'd never had, but at a price she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. Jackson Reed owned half the county and had women falling at his boots wherever he went. At 35, he'd built an empire from dirt and determination, but money had never filled the hollow space in his chest. Until the night he whispered those 4 words that would change everything: "I need you tonight." This is the story of what happens when 2 worlds collide in the most unexpected way, and how sometimes the most dangerous thing about falling isn't hitting the ground, but realizing you never want to get back up. Emma Martinez pressed her face against the grimy bus window as Cedar Falls came into view. The town looked exactly like every other small Texas town she'd passed through: dusty Main Street, faded storefronts, and pickup trucks that had seen better decades. But this was different. This was her fresh start. She clutched the crumpled newspaper clipping in her sweaty palm. Waitress wanted. Miller's Diner. Good tips for hard workers. It wasn't much, but it was something. At 20, she'd already survived more than most people twice her age, and she wasn't about to let a little thing like starting over in a strange town scare her. The bus whizzed to a stop outside what looked like the only gas station in town. Emma grabbed her single duffel bag and stepped into the suffocating Texas heat. The driver barely glanced at her as he handed down her guitar case, the one thing from her old life she couldn't bear to leave behind. "This is it?" she asked, looking around at the scattered buildings that seemed to be melting into the horizon. "Welcome to paradise, sweetheart," the driver said with a laugh that sounded more like a cough. Population 800 and shrinking every year. The bus pulled away in a cloud of black smoke, leaving Emma standing alone on the cracked asphalt. She looked down at the address scrawled on the back of the newspaper clipping. Miller's Diner was supposedly just 3 blocks down Main Street. She could walk it in 5 minutes. But first, she needed a moment to breathe. To really believe she'd done it. She'd finally gotten away from her stepfather's house in El Paso, from his wandering hands and her mother's blind eyes. From the friends who thought waitressing was the highest she could aim. From everyone who'd ever made her feel small. She started walking, her guitar case bumping against her leg with each step. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and she could already feel sweat beading on her forehead. But she didn't care. For the first time in years, every step was her choice. Miller's Diner sat on the corner of Main and First, a low building with faded blue siding and windows that needed a good cleaning. But the neon sign in the window still glowed cheerfully, open. Emma took a deep breath, pushed through the screen door, and stepped into her future. The inside was exactly what she'd expected: red vinyl booths, a long counter with spinning stools, and the smell of bacon grease and coffee that seemed permanently baked into the walls. A few locals sat scattered around, nursing coffee and talking in low voices that stopped the moment she walked in. "You must be the girl who called about the job," came a voice from behind the counter. A woman in her 50s emerged, wiping her hands on a grease-stained apron. She had kind eyes but a no-nonsense mouth. "I'm Betty Miller." "You Emma?" "Yes, ma'am." Emma set down her bags and extended her hand. "Emma Martinez. Thank you so much for giving me a chance." Betty's handshake was firm and brief. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't heard what the job pays." She gestured to a booth in the corner. "Sit. Let's talk." As they talked, Emma learned that the job paid minimum wage plus tips, that she'd work 6 days a week, and that Betty needed someone who could start immediately. The only housing Betty knew of was a tiny apartment above the auto parts store that rented for $300 a month. "It's not much," Betty warned, "but it's clean and the rent includes utilities. Old man Patterson who owns it is fair, but he wants first month's rent up front." Emma's heart sank. $300 might as well have been $3,000. But she nodded and smiled anyway. "That sounds perfect." "Good. You can start tomorrow morning at 6. Breakfast rush starts at 6:30, and you'll want to be ready." Betty stood up. "Let me drive you over to Patterson's place so you can take a look." The apartment was tiny, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so small Emma could touch both walls at the same time. But it had a window that looked out onto Main Street, and the late afternoon light streaming in made it feel warm and hopeful. "I'll take it," Emma said without hesitation. Patterson, a grizzled man in his 70s, looked her up and down with shrewd eyes. "You got the deposit?" Emma's cheeks burned. "I'll have it by the end of the week. I just started a job at Miller's, no deposit, no apartment." He started to turn away. "Please." The word came out more desperate than she'd intended. "I just need a few days. I'm good for it, I swear." Patterson paused, studying her face. Something in her expression must have convinced him because he sighed heavily. "1 week. You don't have the money by next Friday, you're out." Emma nodded so hard her neck hurt. "Thank you. You won't regret this." But, as Patterson handed her the key, Emma wondered if she'd just made a promise she couldn't keep. That first week at Miller's diner passed in a blur of coffee refills, breakfast orders, and aching feet. Emma threw herself into the work with desperate determination. She memorized every customer's usual order, always had a pot of fresh coffee ready, and never complained when someone changed their mind 3 times or left a mess that took 20 minutes to clean up. The tips were better than she'd dared to hope. Not great, but enough that by Thursday night, she'd counted and recounted her money and realized she was going to make it. She'd have Patterson's deposit by Friday afternoon. Friday morning started like any other. Emma arrived at 5:30 to help Betty prep for the breakfast rush. She'd just finished filling all the salt and pepper shakers when the screen door opened with its familiar squeak. She looked up with her standard cheerful greeting ready, but the words died in her throat. The man standing in the doorway was nothing like their usual customers. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing jeans that actually fit and a white button-down shirt that probably cost more than Emma made in a week. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he removed his sunglasses, she found herself staring into the bluest eyes she'd ever seen. But it wasn't just his looks that made her stomach flip. It was the way he carried himself, like he owned not just the room but everything in it. Like he'd never had to ask for anything twice. He scanned the diner with those blue eyes until they landed on her. And then, he smiled, a slow, easy grin that made her forget how to breathe. "Morning," he said, his voice low and smooth. "Mind if I sit anywhere?" Emma realized she'd been staring and felt heat rush to her cheeks. "Of course. Anywhere you'd like." He chose a booth in her section, whether by accident or design, she couldn't tell. As he settled in, she noticed other customers turning to look. A few nodded respectfully. One older man actually tipped his hat. Emma grabbed a menu and a coffee pot, trying to steady her suddenly shaky hands. This was ridiculous. So what if he was good-looking? She'd served plenty of attractive men before, though none quite like this. She approached his table with what she hoped was professional confidence. "Coffee to start?" "Please." He held her gaze as she poured, and she had to concentrate to keep her hand steady. "You're new." It wasn't a question. Emma set the pot down carefully. "Started this week. Can I get you something to eat? What do you recommend?" The simple question seemed loaded with meaning, though Emma couldn't figure out why. She cleared her throat. "The pancakes are really popular. Betty makes them from scratch." "Betty?" "She owns the place." Emma gestured toward the kitchen, where Betty was visible through the pass-through window. He nodded slowly, still watching Emma with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "I'll take the pancakes then. And some bacon. How do you like your bacon?" "Crispy." His smile widened slightly. "I like things with a little bite to them." Emma wrote down the order with hands that trembled slightly. She was being ridiculous, reading things into innocent comments. But something about this man made her feel like she was standing too close to a fire. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back. When she turned to check, he was indeed watching her, making no attempt to hide it. He lifted his coffee cup in a small salute, and she spun around so fast she nearly walked into the counter. "Careful there, honey," Betty said with amusement. "Who's got you all flustered?" Emma glanced back at the mysterious customer. "Who is he?" Betty followed her gaze and her expression shifted subtly. "That's Jackson Reed." The name meant nothing to Emma, but clearly it should have. "Should I know who that is?" "He owns about half the county, including the biggest ranch in 300 miles. Reed Ranch has been in his family for 4 generations. Betty's voice carried a note of warning. "Rich as sin and twice as dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Betty gave her a look that was part maternal concern, part amusement. "Honey, men like Jackson Reed don't come into places like Miller's Diner. They have people who bring them food. The fact that he's here, looking at you like you're the most interesting thing he's seen in years." She shook her head. "Just be careful." Emma delivered Jackson's breakfast with hands that were steadier now but a heart that was beating too fast. He thanked her politely, asked how she was liking Cedar Falls, and made small talk that seemed normal on the surface but felt charged with something she couldn't name. When he finished eating, he left a $20 tip on a $12 meal. "Generous tipper," Betty observed after he'd gone. Emma stared at the 20, knowing she should be happy about the money but feeling strangely unsettled instead. "Very." "Emma." Betty's voice was serious now. "Jackson Reed is a good man, as far as I know. Fair to his employees, takes care of his land, minds his own business mostly. But he's also used to getting what he wants. And, right now, what he wants seems to be you." Emma felt her cheeks burn. "You don't know that. Honey, I've been watching people for 50 years. Trust me, I know." Betty touched Emma's arm gently. "Just remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing about playing with fire isn't getting burned. It's how good the heat feels right before you do." That afternoon, Emma walked to Patterson's auto parts store with her rent money clutched in her sweaty palm. She'd made it. She'd actually made it. Patterson counted the bills twice before nodding approval. "Cutting it close, but money's money. Thank you for giving me the chance." "Don't thank me yet," he said, echoing Betty's words from a week earlier. "Staying is harder than starting." As Emma walked back to her tiny apartment, she felt lighter than she had in months. She had a job, a place to live, and nobody looking over her shoulder or making demands she didn't want to meet. For the first time in her life, she was completely on her own. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the truck parked outside her building until she was almost to the door. It was a beautiful thing, midnight blue with chrome that gleamed like jewelry. But it was the man leaning against it that made her steps falter. Jackson Reed pushed himself away from the truck as she approached. In the late afternoon light, he looked even more imposing than he had in the diner. But his smile was warm, almost shy. "Emma." Her name sounded different when he said it. "Hope you don't mind me waiting. I wanted to talk to you." Her heart was doing things that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. "How did you know where I live?" "Small town." He shrugged. "People talk." Emma clutched her keys tighter. This was insane. She'd known this man for exactly one breakfast conversation, and here he was outside her apartment like something out of a movie. "What did you want to talk about?" Jackson stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her want to lean in instead of backing away. "I want to show you something," he said. "My ranch. It's beautiful at sunset. I don't even know you. That's what I'm trying to fix." His voice was low, persuasive. "One evening. I'll pick you up tomorrow after you get off work, show you around, bring you back. No strings, no pressure." Emma knew she should say no. Everything about this screamed complications she didn't need. But when she looked into those blue eyes, all her careful resolutions crumbled. "Why?" she heard herself ask. "Because you're not like anyone else in this town. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His fingers were warm and calloused, working man's hands despite his obvious wealth. "Because when you walked into Miller's this morning, you made everything else disappear." Emma's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever looked at her the way Jackson Reed was looking at her now, like she was precious and dangerous and necessary all at once. "I finish work at 3, she heard herself say. Jackson's smile could have powered the whole town. "I'll be there." As his truck pulled away, Emma stood on the sidewalk staring after it, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Betty's warnings echoed in her head, but they were drowned out by the memory of his fingers against her skin and the promise in his voice. She was playing with fire, all right. But, for the first time in her life, she didn't care about getting burned. Emma spent the entire next day in a state of nervous anticipation that made it impossible to concentrate on anything. She spilled coffee on Mrs. Henderson's favorite dress, mixed up 2 breakfast orders, and dropped an entire tray of dishes that shattered across the diner floor like her composure. "Lord have mercy," Betty muttered as Emma swept up the pieces. "You're a mess today. Maybe you should call that Reed boy and tell him you're sick." "I'm fine," Emma insisted, though her hands were shaking as she dumped the broken ceramic into the trash. "Just tired." "Aha." Betty's tone made it clear she wasn't buying it. "You know, it's not too late to change your mind. Rich men like Jackson Reed, they're used to collecting pretty things. The question is what happens when they get bored with them." Emma straightened up, meeting Betty's concerned gaze. "Maybe he's not like that. Maybe pigs fly too, but I wouldn't bet my life on it." But, despite Betty's warnings and her own churning stomach, Emma couldn't bring herself to back out. There was something about Jackson Reed that pulled at her in ways she didn't understand. The way he'd looked at her, touched her face, said her name like it mattered, no one had ever made her feel that important before. At 3 o'clock sharp, she untied her apron with hands that trembled slightly. She'd changed into her nicest jeans and a blue blouse that Betty said brought out her eyes, though she only owned 3 outfits anyway, so her choices were limited. "You be careful," Betty said as Emma headed for the door. "And, if he tries anything you don't want, you call me. I don't care what time it is." Emma nodded, though part of her wondered what exactly she did want. The thought scared and excited her in equal measure. Jackson was waiting outside in his beautiful truck, and, when he saw her coming, he got out to open the passenger door for her. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt that showed off his broad shoulders and strong arms. More casual than yesterday, but somehow even more devastating. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she approached. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from men who looked like they belonged in magazines. "Thank you." The interior of his truck was as impressive as the outside, leather seats, a sound system that probably cost more than Emma made in 6 months, and that new car smell that spoke of money and success. As they pulled away from the diner, she caught several people watching through the windows. "This is going to be all over town by dinner," she said. Jackson glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Does that bother you?" "Should it?" "That depends. Do you care what people think?" Emma considered this as they drove through town and out onto the open highway. She'd spent her whole life worrying about what people thought, trying to be invisible, trying not to cause trouble. But, sitting next to Jackson in his expensive truck, she found herself caring less about the opinions of people she barely knew. "I guess we'll find out," she said. Jackson smiled at that, and she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. The Reed Ranch was 15 miles outside of town, but Emma would have known they were getting close even without Jackson's commentary. The landscape gradually shifted from scrubland to rolling green pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. Everything looked well-maintained and prosperous, from the pristine white fencing to the modern windmills that dotted the horizon. "How big is it?" Emma asked, staring out at land that seemed to stretch forever. 50,000 acres, give or take." Jackson said it casually, as if that number didn't represent more wealth than Emma could comprehend. "My great-grandfather started with 100 acres and a handful of cattle. Each generation has expanded it." They turned through an imposing gate marked with a wrought iron R and drove up a long, tree-lined drive. Emma's breath caught when the house came into view. It wasn't the sprawling mansion she'd expected, but rather a beautiful ranch-style home that seemed to grow out of the landscape itself. Stone and wood and glass that reflected the golden light of the late afternoon sun. "It's gorgeous," she breathed. "Wait until you see the sunset from the back porch." Jackson parked near the house and came around to help her out. His hand was warm and strong as he helped her down from the high cab, and he didn't let go immediately. For a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his blue eyes, could smell his cologne mixed with something that was purely him. "Come on," he said softly. "Let me show you around." The house was even more beautiful inside: high ceilings, rustic wooden beams, furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what struck Emma most was how lived in it felt. This wasn't a showplace, it was a home. "Do you live here alone?" she asked as they walked through a spacious living room dominated by a massive stone fireplace. "Most of the time. My parents moved to their place in town a few years ago when Dad's arthritis got bad. They still come out for Sunday dinners and holidays, but day to day it's just me." Emma tried to imagine what it would be like to have all this space to herself. Her entire apartment could fit into Jackson's kitchen, which was a masterpiece of granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that looked like they belonged in a restaurant. "Do you cook?" she asked. "Some. Mostly I grill steaks and hope for the best." He opened the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of wine. "You want some?" "It's from a vineyard in California that a friend of mine owns." Emma nodded, though she'd never developed much of a taste for wine. She watched Jackson open the bottle with practiced ease and pour it into 2 glasses that probably cost more than she made in a day. "To new friends," he said, raising his glass. "New friends," she echoed, touching her glass to his. The wine was smooth and fruity, nothing like the cheap stuff she'd tried before. Everything in Jackson's world was better, she realized. Better wine, better food, better everything. They walked out onto the back porch, and Emma gasped at the view. The house sat on a hill overlooking the entire ranch, and from here she could see the pastures stretching out in all directions. Horses grazed in a nearby field, and, in the distance, she could make out what looked like a lake. "My God," she whispered. "Pretty, isn't it?" Jackson moved to stand beside her at the railing. "I never get tired of this view." They stood in comfortable silence, sipping wine and watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Emma felt some of her nervousness beginning to fade. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd thought Jackson might be arrogant or demanding, but instead he seemed genuinely interested in showing her something he loved. "Tell me about yourself," he said eventually. "What brought you to Cedar Falls?" Emma tensed slightly. This was the conversation she'd been dreading. "Not much to tell. I needed a fresh start." "Running from something?" His voice was gentle, not prying, but Emma still felt exposed. She took a larger sip of wine before answering. "Someone, actually." Jackson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Someone who hurt you?" Emma looked out at the peaceful landscape, so different from the cramped house in El Paso where she'd spent the last 2 years walking on eggshells. "My stepfather. He had a hard time understanding the word no." She felt rather than saw Jackson go very still beside her. When she glanced at him, his blue eyes had gone cold as winter. "Did he know?" Emma said quickly. "Not like that. But he wanted to, and he was getting bolder." "My mom." She shrugged. "My mom chose him over me a long time ago. So I chose myself." Jackson set down his wineglass and turned to face her fully. "How old are you, Emma?" 20. She lifted her chin slightly. "Old enough to make my own decisions." "Yes," he said quietly. "You are." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. There was an intensity in his expression that hadn't been there before, something that made her pulse quicken. "What about you?" she asked. "Ever been married?" "Once. Briefly." He picked up his wine again, taking a sip before continuing. College sweethearts who thought love would be enough to bridge the gap between her dreams and my reality. What happened? She wanted the city. I wanted the land. In the end, neither of us was willing to compromise. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. She's a lawyer in Dallas now. Has the career she always wanted. Do you regret it? Jackson considered this for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I regret that we couldn't find a way to make it work. But I don't regret choosing this place. It's who I am. Emma could hear the certainty in his voice, the deep connection he had to this land. It was something she'd never experienced, that sense of belonging somewhere so completely. Must be nice, she said softly. What? Knowing where you belong. Jackson turned to look at her, and the intensity was back in his eyes. Maybe you do know. Maybe you just haven't realized it yet. Before Emma could ask what he meant, the sun touched the horizon, and the sky exploded into shades of gold and pink and deep orange. She'd seen plenty of sunsets, but never like this, never with such an endless view, never with someone like Jackson standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. It's incredible, she breathed. Yes, Jackson said, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the sunset. The wine was making her bold, or maybe it was the way he was looking at her, but Emma found herself stepping closer. Jackson. Emma. Her name was barely a whisper as he reached up to cup her face in his hands. I've been thinking about you since the moment you walked into that diner. You don't even know me. I know enough. His thumb traced across her cheekbone. I know you're brave enough to leave everything behind and start over with nothing but hope in your pocket. I know you work harder than anyone else in that diner and never complain. I know you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen. Emma's breath caught. No one had ever talked to her like this, like she was precious and worth pursuing. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. I know you're way out of my league, she whispered. Jackson's smile was soft and genuine. Sweetheart, you have no idea what league you're in. And then, he was kissing her, gentle at first, then deeper when she didn't pull away. His lips were warm and sure, and the kiss tasted like wine and possibility and everything Emma had never known she wanted. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and shaking slightly. Jackson rested his forehead against hers, his hands still cradling her face. Stay, he said quietly. Have dinner with me. Let me cook for you. Every rational thought in Emma's head was screaming at her to say no, to ask him to take her home before this went any further. But the wine and the sunset and the way he was looking at her made rational thought seem overrated. Okay, she whispered. Jackson's smile was brilliant as he kissed her forehead gently. Good. I'll go start the grill. As he disappeared into the house, Emma gripped the porch railing and tried to steady herself. She was in dangerous territory now, but, for the first time in her life, danger felt like freedom. Dinner was perfect, perfectly grilled steaks, perfectly roasted vegetables, perfectly chilled wine served at a table on the porch under a canopy of stars. Jackson was charming and attentive, asking about her dreams, her music, her plans for the future. He listened like her answers mattered, like she mattered. By the time they finished eating, Emma had consumed more wine than she'd ever had in her life, and the world had taken on a soft, dreamy quality that made everything seem possible. Play something for me, Jackson said as they moved to the comfortable outdoor furniture near the railing. What? Your guitar. I saw you carrying it that first day. Emma shook her head quickly. I'm not very good. I don't care. He settled back in his chair, watching her with those intense blue eyes. Play whatever you want. Something about the wine and the starlight and the way he was looking at her made Emma feel brave. She retrieved her guitar from his truck where he'd stored it when they arrived, and settled into the chair across from him. Her fingers found the familiar chords without conscious thought, and she began to sing softly, a song she'd written during those dark days in El Paso when music was the only thing that kept her sane. It was about running, about hope, about the courage it takes to choose yourself when everyone else has given up on you. When the last note faded into the night, Jackson was very quiet for a long moment. "Emma," he said finally, his voice rough with something she couldn't identify. "That was beautiful." She ducked her head, embarrassed by the emotion in his voice. "It's just something I wrote. It's not just anything." He leaned forward in his chair. "You have real talent. It's just a hobby. It doesn't have to be." Emma looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I know people in Nashville. People who could help you make something of that voice, those songs." Emma's heart skipped. "You're just being nice." "I'm not in the habit of being nice for the sake of it." Jackson stood up and moved closer, his expression serious. "I'm talking about real connections, Emma. People who could open doors for you." The possibility hung between them, glittering and tempting. Emma had dreamed of making it as a musician since she was a little girl, but dreams seemed impossible when you were just trying to survive day to day. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked quietly. Jackson knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. "Because I see something in you that I don't think you see in yourself yet. Because talent like yours deserves to be heard." Emma stared down at their joined hands, her thoughts spinning. This was moving so fast, too fast. She'd known Jackson for exactly 2 days, and here he was talking about changing her life. "I don't understand what's happening here," she said honestly. Jackson's grip on her hand tightened slightly. "What's happening is that I'm falling for you harder and faster than I've ever fallen for anyone in my life. What's happening is that I want to give you everything you've ever dreamed of and things you haven't even thought to dream yet." Emma's breath caught. "Jackson. I know it's crazy. I know we just met. But I also know that some things are worth taking risks for." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "You're worth taking risks for." The night air was warm, but Emma shivered at the intensity in his voice. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from whatever this was. But a bigger part of her wanted to lean into it, to see what it would feel like to be cherished by a man like Jackson Reed. "I should go home," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Should you?" Jackson's thumb traced across her knuckles. "Or do you want to stay?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise and danger. Emma looked into his blue eyes and saw her own desire reflected back at her. "I want to stay," she whispered. Jackson's smile was slow and sure as he stood up and extended his hand to her. "Then, stay." Emma set down her guitar with shaking hands and let him pull her to her feet. His arms came around her immediately, holding her close against his chest, and she could hear his heart beating fast beneath her ear. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Emma pulled back to look at him, taking in the sharp planes of his face in the starlight. He was beautiful and powerful and dangerous, and he wanted her. For tonight, that was enough. "I'm sure," she said. Jackson's kiss was deeper this time, hungrier, and Emma found herself kissing him back with equal intensity. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could taste the wine on his lips, could feel the barely controlled desire in the way he held her. When he lifted her into his arms like she weighed nothing, she didn't protest. When he carried her into the house and up the stairs to his bedroom, she didn't ask him to stop. And when he laid her gently on his bed and whispered her name like a prayer, she knew she was lost. Emma woke up to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and the unfamiliar sensation of silk sheets against her skin. For a moment, she was completely disoriented, her mind struggling to piece together where she was and how she'd gotten there. Then, she rolled over and saw Jackson sleeping beside her, and everything came flooding back. The wine, the sunset, the way he'd looked at her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever seen. The way he'd touched her, whispered her name, made her feel things she'd never felt before. Heat flooded her cheeks as memories from the night before washed over her. She'd never been with anyone like Jackson, confident and experienced and patient enough to make sure she felt nothing but pleasure. Even now, looking at his face relaxed in sleep, she felt that familiar flutter of desire low in her stomach. But, with the desire came panic. What had she done? She'd slept with a man she barely knew, a man so far out of her league that it wasn't even funny. What did he think of her now? What did this mean? She started to slip out of bed, thinking she could gather her clothes and call a cab somehow, but Jackson's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her back against his warm chest. "Where are you going?" His voice was rough with sleep, and she could feel his breath against her neck. "I should get home. I have to work, it's Saturday." Jackson's lips found that sensitive spot just behind her ear. "Betty told me yesterday that you have weekends off." Emma's brain struggled to form coherent thoughts as he continued pressing soft kisses along her neck. "You asked Betty about my schedule?" "I asked Betty a lot of things about you." Jackson rolled over, pinning her gently beneath him, and Emma's breath caught at the intensity in his blue eyes. "I wanted to know everything." "That's kind of stalkerish," she said, but her voice came out breathy rather than accusatory. Jackson's grin was unrepentant. "That's called being interested. There's a difference." Before Emma could respond, he was kissing her, slow and thorough and devastating. All her worries about what this meant and where it was going melted away under the heat of his mouth on hers. By the time they finally made it downstairs, it was nearly noon. Jackson cooked breakfast, or rather, lunch, while Emma sat at his kitchen island wearing one of his shirts and trying to process the fact that this was her life now, at least for today. "So what do you usually do on Saturdays?" Jackson asked as he set a plate of perfect scrambled eggs and bacon in front of her. "Laundry, grocery shopping, exciting stuff like that." Emma took a bite of eggs that were somehow both fluffy and rich. "These are amazing. My mom taught me." She said any man who couldn't cook a decent breakfast wasn't worth much. Jackson settled onto the stool beside her with his own plate. "What about back in El Paso? What did you do for fun?" Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The question was innocent enough, but it reminded her of how different their worlds were. "I worked mostly. Had a job at a restaurant, helped my mom with bills when I could. Didn't have much time for fun." Jackson was quiet for a moment, and Emma could feel him studying her face. "How long since you've done something just because you wanted to? Not because you had to, not because someone else needed you to, just because it sounded fun?" Emma thought about it and realized she couldn't remember. "I don't know. A long time." "Well then," Jackson said, standing up suddenly. "That's what we're doing today." "What?" "Having fun. Come on." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs. "Get dressed. We're going on an adventure." An hour later, Emma found herself on horseback for the first time in her life, following Jackson along a trail that wound through the prettiest part of his ranch. The horse, a gentle mare named Buttercup, seemed to sense Emma's inexperience and moved slowly and carefully, but Emma still gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles. "Relax," Jackson called from beside her on his own horse, a magnificent black stallion that seemed to respond to his every thought. "She can sense your tension." "Easy for you to say," Emma called back. "You've probably been riding since before you could walk." "Since I was 4, actually." Jackson's grin was boyish and infectious. "But you're doing great. You're a natural." Emma seriously doubted that, but as the ride continued and Buttercup proved herself to be as gentle as Jackson had promised, she began to relax. The view from horseback was incredible: rolling hills and clear streams and wide open sky that seemed to go on forever. They stopped beside a creek where the horses could drink and rest. Jackson helped Emma down, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary, and she felt that now familiar spark of electricity at his touch. "This is beautiful," she said, looking around at the peaceful scene. "Do you ride out here often?" "Whenever I can. It helps me think." Jackson settled on a fallen log beside the creek and patted the space next to him. "Growing up, whenever I got angry or frustrated or scared, I'd saddle up and come out here." "Still do sometimes." Emma sat beside him, suddenly curious about this man who seemed so confident and sure of himself. "What do you have to be scared of? You have everything." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. Having everything means having everything to lose, he said finally. My dad built this ranch from nothing, and his dad before him. Sometimes the weight of that legacy, the pressure to not be the generation that screws it all up, it's overwhelming. Emma heard something in his voice she hadn't expected: vulnerability. It made him seem more real, more human. Is that why you never remarried? Too much pressure? Partly. Jackson looked at her, his expression serious. Also because I never found anyone worth the risk. Until now? The words slipped out before Emma could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. Jackson reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Until now. They rode back to the house as the sun was beginning to set, and Emma found herself more comfortable in the saddle than she'd thought possible. Jackson was a patient teacher, and, by the end of the ride, she was actually enjoying herself. See? Jackson said as he helped her down from Buttercup. Natural. Emma laughed, surprised by how light and happy she felt. I can't remember the last time I smiled this much. Jackson's expression grew serious as he stepped closer to her. You should smile like that all the time. It's hard to smile when you're constantly worried about money and bills and whether you'll have a roof over your head next month. You don't have to worry about those things anymore, Jackson said quietly. Emma stiffened slightly. What do you mean? I mean, I want to take care of you. Jackson's hands came up to frame her face. I want to make sure you never have to worry about having enough money or a safe place to sleep or anything else ever again. Emma's heart began to race, but not entirely in a good way. Jackson, we've known each other for 2 days, so? When you know, you know. His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones. I know you're special, Emma. I know you deserve better than scraping by on waitress tips and living in a tiny apartment above an auto parts store. Emma pulled back slightly, something cold settling in her stomach. There's nothing wrong with being a waitress or living in a small apartment. No, of course not. That's not what I meant. Jackson looked frustrated. I just meant that you could have so much more. I could give you so much more. Like what? Like anything you want. A house, a car, a recording studio where you could work on your music. Jackson's eyes were bright with enthusiasm. I meant what I said about my connections in Nashville. One phone call, and you could have a meeting with people who could change your life. Emma stared at him, her mind reeling. And what would you want in return? Jackson looked genuinely puzzled. What do you mean? Nobody gives someone else everything they've ever dreamed of without expecting something back. What would you want from me? Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes, followed quickly by something that looked like hurt. I would want you to be happy. I would want you to be with me. As what? Your girlfriend? Your wife? Emma heard her voice getting higher, more desperate. Or just your kept woman? Emma, because that's what this sounds like. You want to set me up in a pretty cage and take care of me like some kind of pet. Jackson's jaw tightened. That's not what I'm offering. Isn't it? Emma wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly, feeling cold despite the warm evening air. You want me to be dependent on you, grateful to you. You want me to need you. And that's so terrible? Jackson's voice rose slightly. What's wrong with wanting to take care of someone you care about? Because I don't want to be taken care of. The words exploded out of Emma with more force than she'd intended. I want to take care of myself. For the first time in my life, I'm supporting myself, making my own decisions, not depending on anyone else for anything. And you want to take that away from me? Jackson ran a hand through his hair, his expression frustrated and confused. I'm trying to give you everything you've ever wanted. How do you know what I want? Emma interrupted. You don't know me, Jackson. You don't know that I've spent my whole life having other people make decisions for me, tell me what I should want, what I should do. You see a pretty waitress and you think you can rescue her, make her grateful enough to be whatever you need her to be. That's not. Jackson stopped, his face going very still. Is that really what you think? That I'm trying to buy you? Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw genuine hurt in his eyes. But she was too worked up now, too scared by how easily she'd almost let herself fall into the trap of depending on someone else again. I think you're used to getting what you want, she said quietly. And I think you want me to be something I'm not ready to be. Jackson stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What are you ready to be, Emma? I don't know yet, she admitted. That's the point. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to survive, when I'm not scared, when I'm making choices for myself. I can't do that if I'm depending on you for everything. Jackson nodded slowly, though Emma could see the disappointment in his face. So what do you want from me? Emma's heart clenched at the question. What did she want? She wanted him, that much was becoming terrifyingly clear. But she also wanted to want him for the right reasons, not because he represented safety and security she'd never had. I want to get to know you, she said finally. Really know you, not just the version of you that's trying to impress me or take care of me. I want you to get to know me too, not who you think I could be, but who I actually am. And then, we'll see. Jackson was quiet for a long time, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. Emma watched him struggle with her answer, and she could see the exact moment he made his decision. Okay, he said finally. We'll do this your way. Really? Jackson's smile was small but genuine. Really? But I have one condition. Emma tensed. What? You let me court you properly. Dinners, movies, long conversations about everything and nothing. I want to earn you, Emma, not buy you. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. You don't have to earn me, Jackson. Yes, I do. Jackson stepped closer and took her hands gently. You're worth earning. You're worth waiting for. You're worth doing this right. Emma looked up into his blue eyes and saw something there that made her breath catch, not just desire or infatuation, but genuine respect. Maybe even love, though it was too soon for that word. Okay, she whispered. Jackson's smile was brilliant as he leaned down to kiss her forehead. Good. Now come on, let's get these horses settled and I'll take you home. Actually, Emma said, surprising herself with her boldness, could I stay one more night? Just, not because of anything you're offering me or giving me. Just because I want to be with you. Jackson's eyes darkened with something that made Emma's stomach flutter. Are you sure? I'm sure. Emma rose up on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. But tomorrow you take me home, and we start over. We do this right. Deal, Jackson murmured against her lips. As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Emma felt something she'd never experienced before, the perfect balance between desire and independence, between wanting someone and wanting herself. It was scary and exhilarating and absolutely right. She didn't know where this thing with Jackson was going, but, for the first time, she was willing to find out. Not because he could give her everything she'd ever dreamed of, but because he was willing to let her discover what those dreams actually were. And, maybe, just maybe, they could build something together that was worth more than all the security and comfort in the world, something real, something chosen, something that belonged to both of them equally. The next morning, Jackson drove Emma home as promised. But not before he made her breakfast again, not before he kissed her thoroughly against his kitchen counter, and not before he made her promise to have dinner with him the following Friday. A real date, he said as he walked her to her apartment door. I'll pick you up at 7. A real date, Emma agreed, smiling up at him. As she watched his truck disappear down Main Street, Emma felt something settle inside her chest, contentment mixed with anticipation, security mixed with possibility. She had her tiny apartment, her waitress job, her independence. But she also had Jackson Reed looking at her like she hung the moon, and the promise of Friday night stretching out ahead of them like a beautiful question waiting to be answered. For the first time in her life, Emma Martinez knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. And what she wanted was to find out just how good it could be when two people chose each other freely, completely, and without conditions. Betty was right, Jackson Reed was dangerous. But not in the way Emma had feared. He was dangerous because he made her want to be brave enough to love someone, and to let herself be loved in return. And that, Emma realized as she climbed the stairs to her little apartment with a smile on her face, was the most beautiful danger of all.